I used to believe there were certain lines in life that could never be crossed. Some boundaries were unspoken but deeply understood, and yet, when the moment arrived, I found myself standing on the very edge of them, unable to step back. It started on an ordinary evening. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that only settles in when the world outside grows dark, and everyone finds their own corner of solitude. I was in the kitchen, absent-mindedly wiping down the counters, my mind elsewhere, lost in the kind of thoughts that surface when you're alone. Then came the knock. A gentle, hesitant tapping against the wooden frame of the doorway. I turned and saw him, my stepson. He looked troubled, standing there with his hands shoved into the pockets of his hoodie, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give. I'd raised him since he was a teenager, but he had grown into a man before my very eyes. And tonight, there was something different in the way he carried himself, something weighty, unresolved. "Can I talk to you?" His voice was quieter than usual, laced with hesitation. I nodded, placing the dish towel aside. "Of course. What's on your mind?" He stepped forward, into the warm glow of the kitchen light, rubbing the back of his neck as though trying to find the right words. "It's about relationships." My eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised by his confession. He had never come to me for personal matters like this before. There had always been a respectful distance between us, one that neither of us had ever tried to break. But tonight, that wall was crumbling, brick by brick, right before my eyes. I leaned against the counter, folding my arms. "All right, I'm listening." He took a breath, exhaling slowly, his fingers drumming anxiously against his thigh. I feel lost. I don't know what to do." There was something in his voice, an emotion I couldn't quite place. Vulnerability, desperation, a longing for something unspoken. "Tell me," I urged gently. "What's going on?" He hesitated, then slowly met my gaze. "I've been feeling different lately, like I don't know where I belong. And there's this connection I can't explain." A strange shiver ran down my spine. His words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning, yet unclear enough to keep me teetering on the edge of comprehension. I swallowed, choosing my next words carefully. Sometimes feelings can be confusing. It's natural to question things, especially when emotions get involved. He nodded, but his eyes never left mine. What if you realize something about yourself that you shouldn't feel?" Silence. The kind that stretches too long, that makes the air thick and unbreathable. I felt a sudden, inexplicable heat rising to my cheeks, though I didn't understand why. I forced myself to hold his gaze, to keep my voice steady. We don't always control our emotions, but we do control what we do with them. He exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. "What if you don't want to control them?" Something shifted in the atmosphere. The room suddenly felt smaller, the distance between us shorter, the weight of his words pressing down on me with an intensity one wasn't prepared for. I needed to break this moment, to breathe, to stop whatever was unraveling between us before it went too far. I turned away, reaching for a glass of water, anything to ground myself. "I think you need to be careful," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Emotions can be misleading, and acting on them can change everything." Behind me, I could hear him exhale, a mixture of frustration and something else I couldn't name. What if? I don't want things to stay the same. I closed my eyes, gripping the counter. The line, the one I had sworn I would never cross, was right there, trembling beneath my feet. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. I stood there, gripping the counter, trying to steady the storm inside me. His words echoed in my head. What if I don't want things to stay the same? A deep breath. I turned to face him, keeping my expression neutral, though my pulse was anything but steady. "You don't always get to choose that," I said, my voice softer than I intended. Some things are meant to stay as they are." His gaze darkened, unreadable. But what if that's not enough? A single step forward. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, charged. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. Too close. I had to end this. With all the strength I could muster, I turned away, forcing a small, tense laugh. You're overthinking things. I think you're just confused. I'm not confused. His voice was firm now, steady in a way that sent another shiver down my spine. I clenched my jaw, shaking my head. You're young. You're going through changes, that's all. People get caught up in moments like this, but it doesn't mean anything. Is that what you're telling yourself? His words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. There was something piercing in the way he said it, like he knew something I didn't want to acknowledge. Like he saw through the careful mask I was trying so hard to keep in place. A strange mix of emotions swirled inside me: denial, fear, a dangerous curiosity. I had never allowed myself to think in these terms before, never questioned the nature of the bond we had. And yet, here I was, teetering on the edge of something I couldn't name, something I didn't want to name. I turned back, meeting his gaze head-on. You should go, I said, ignoring the tightness in my throat. Before this conversation turns into something it shouldn't be. His chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. His fingers flexed at his sides as though battling an internal war. His eyes, those same eyes I had watched grow up, had comforted in times of sadness, held something different now. Something dangerous. Fine. One word. Cold. Final. But it didn't feel final. As he turned to leave, I felt something unexpected, an ache, a pull in my chest that I couldn't explain. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, nails biting into my palms. I wanted to say something, to break the silence, to undo the boundaries I had just tried so hard to reinforce. I didn't. Instead, I let him walk away. The sound of his footsteps retreating down the hall should have brought me relief. It didn't. The weight in my chest only grew heavier as I listened to his bedroom door close with a quiet, decisive click. I stayed frozen in place, staring at the empty doorway. My thoughts swirled, crashing into one another, each more dangerous than the last. Had I imagined the intensity in his eyes? Had I misunderstood his words? Or worse, had I understood them perfectly? The what-ifs clawed at me. What if I had let him stay a little longer? What if I hadn't stopped him? What if? No. I shook my head forcefully, pushing the thoughts away. This was a line I couldn't cross, a moment that could never happen again. I grabbed my glass of water and took a shaky sip, my fingers trembling as I set it back down. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with something I didn't want to name. I needed to sleep, to shake off this feeling. Tomorrow, things would go back to normal. They had to. But as I turned off the kitchen light and made my way toward my bedroom, I knew deep down, nothing would ever be the same again. And I wasn't sure if that terrified me or thrilled me.